Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In the last episode, we saw that Mal finally got some help when a chauffeur was hired to drive the Beatles around. This let Mal do other duties such as taking care of the musical instruments and getting the Beatles their food. Mal could be hurt by John and his remarks, but he loved him. He also had Brian get on him from time to time, but it never reached the point where he walked away like Derek Taylor did. So let's see what's going on today. While everyone was at the Hammersmith Odeon, Mal was in conflict with Brian again. Mal wrote, "After a couple of weeks, the show tended to get very free and easy, with a lot of ad-libbing in the sketches, and usually by the end of the season, the sketch didn't bear much of a resemblance to the original written script. One night during their act on stage, they talked me into sitting on the stage with them, drinking cups of tea and reading a newspaper. It was a funny idea, but after the show, Brian gave me a right roast. Mal distressed by Epstein's short temper, he understood the reason why, though." One afternoon during a break in the Christmas shows, George Martin stopped by to share his season's greetings. Martin admitted to Mal that when Mal first joined the group, he was a little antagonistic at somebody else getting close to the Beatles. Mal said, "I understood exactly what he meant, for I have the same feeling for them. One not only gets very protective, but a little selfish and jealous of anybody who gets." Their conversation presented the ways in which members of the entourage often felt a sense of ownership over the boys, becoming envious of others who happened to share their orbit. Mal also had an issue with the Yardbirds. They were one of the Beatles' supporting acts during the Christmas residency and during their upcoming tour on the continent. Mal wrote they preceded the Beatles, and unfortunately the drummer Jim McCarty had broken his snare drum skin. Now the snare drum to a drummer is his pride and joy. It seems to take years of playing to break the skin to get something sounding exactly as he likes it. This particular night, having broken his, McCarty just took Ringo's snare drum from his side of the stage. That I discovered this, then it was panic for a few minutes. But as I always carried spares for everything, it was soon replaced. You can borrow anything except the snare drum. To a drummer, that is sacred." There was also an issue with the Jelly Babies, which continued to greet the Beatles in a hailstorm as soon as the curtain opened. I still don't understand why the fans would want to do this, because who would want to eat an unwrapped candy that lands on the floor? But after the shows, Fanning recalled working with Mal to swab up the candy's awful residue. Night after night, we would have to clean all the guitar leads and mic cables of squashed, sticky Jelly Babies, a huge pain in the you-know-what. That Christmas, Mal and Neil handled the shopping duties as televisions and other electronic gadgetries for their friends and relations. By this point, the Roadies were responsible for carrying large amounts of petty cash in order to handle the bandmates' expenses. That could be from picking up bar to much loftier purchases at their discretion. Mal was unable to make it home to Liverpool for the holidays that year, but Fanning good-naturedly offered to ferry Christmas gifts to Mosley Hill for Lil and Gary on his behalf. On Christmas Eve, Fanning recalled that both Mal and Neil received tiny packages from the boys. Neil was flabbergasted when he opened his present, which contained the keys to a slightly used 2.4-liter Jaguar sports car. Mal's gift was more practical but equally welcome. He received the keys to a Humber Super Snipe estate car, perfect for a family man, not to mention a person of his stature. The Beatles completed their Christmas residency, and they got to enjoy a much-needed rest before regrouping with Mal at the EMI studios on February the 15th, 1965. The Beatle world was moving as fast as always. Ringo got married to Maureen Cox, and now just as suddenly the band was back in the studio to begin compiling new music for their second feature film, tentatively titled 8 Arms to Hold You. It would be a zany James Bond-era farce. They would be in the Bahamas only 8 days later. Ray Coleman, a reporter from Melody Maker, was on hand at the February 18th recording session, where he took note of the boys' special relationship with Mal. With Paul working the electric piano on Tell Me What You See, John said, "I like electric pianos. Mal, go buy me one tomorrow." As Ringo climbed up on Mal's back for a ride, the music writer couldn't help appreciating the group's obvious affection for their roadie. For their part, Neil and Alf whiled away most of the session playing chess. As Mal devoted more and more of his working hours to the Beatles' efforts in the studio, he came to know their instruments of choice, along with each musician's preferred string gauges, guitar leads, drumsticks, and plectrums. On February the 16th, Mal made the rounds of London music vendors with an eye towards purchasing a pair of Fender Stratocasters for George and John. It was funny, George later recalled, because all these American bands kept coming over to England saying, "How do you get that guitar sound?" And the more I listened to it, the more I decided I didn't like the guitar sound I had. It was crap. A Gretsch guitar and a Vox amp, and I didn't like it. But those were early days, and we were lucky to have anything when we started out. But anyway, I decided to get a Strat, and John decided he'd get one too. So we sent out our roadie, Mal Evans, to go and get us 2 Strats, and he came back with 2 of them, pale blue. Straight away, we used them on the album we were making at the time. George played his Sonic Blue Strat on Ticket to Ride, the rollicking tune that emerged as the Beatles' next single. Mal had rounded up the 1961 Strats, which retailed for approximately 180 pounds apiece. In present-day pounds, it would be 2,843 pounds. That's quite a lot of money. By the time they left for the Bahamas, where they began filming in late February, the Beatles' weed habit was in full bloom. American actor Brandon DeWild was along for the ride, bringing with him a healthy supply of pot for the trip to the islands. George said that DeWild was an actor, a James Dean type. He liked the Beatles' music, and he heard we were going to film in the Bahamas, so he came over from the States with a big bag of reefer. We smoked on the plane all the way to the Bahamas. It was a charter flight with all the film people, the actors, and the crew, and we thought, no, nobody will notice, and we had Mal smoking cigars to drown out the smell. I'm sure they must have smelled that. Mal was a jack of all trades and proud of it. During his years with the band, he had discovered that the best way to avoid being ribbed by the boys was to be ready for virtually anything. To this end, he continued to get more things in his ever-growing doctor's bag to meet the Beatles' every possible whim. The bag had musical instrument paraphernalia, plectrums, guitar strings, and the like, along with household items such as aspirin, chewing gum, flashlight, potato chips, cookies, tissues, and cigarettes, of course. He kept a ready supply of Senior Service, his favorite brand of tobacco, at its finest, according to the advertising copy of the day. In recent months, he had taken to carrying around yet another piece of luggage, which he lovingly called his dope bag, a brown suede bag with the OM sign prominently displayed. The carrier served as a miniature head shop, complete with freshly rolled joints and other separate items. When they got to the Bahamas, the Beatles and their entourage settled into a series of beachside bungalows at the Balmoral Club. In Nassau, Mal was reunited with Larry Kane, with whom he had made plans for the band's summer North American tour, especially their 5-day respite in Hollywood. Kane quickly asserted that Mal and the Beatles were high. As with Paul's revelation back in August that there were 7 levels, John was repeating his own new revelation by that time. Everything is wide open. Anything can happen. After admonishing Kane to refrain from reporting on the Beatles' pot use, Mal joined his American friend for a night on the town. The evening out with Evans and fellow reporter Long John Wade allowed me to observe the depths of Evans' newfound love of marijuana, combined with drink. Kane recalled a love that sent us off to several nightclubs and ended with Long John and me dragging Malcolm by his arms back to my hotel room. When Kane asked him to name his favorite member of the band, Mal replied, "You want to get me sacked? I do love George. You know there is a soul inside that skinny face. Paul is a sweetheart. Yeah, I'm an errand boy, fixer, handymate, you know, but I would do anything for them. Paul is easier to like than John, but John's a mad genius, and Ringo just a sweet man." The next morning over coffee, Mal was refreshed and cheerful. He was doing the set that morning, not as the Beatles' roadie, but as an actor. Along with the band members, he spent hours on Nassau Beach working with director Richard Lester and his crew. For his film, he was to play the channel swimmer, a wayward aquanaut searching in vain for the white cliffs of Dover. During the shoot, Mal had a moment of unexpected terror. He said, as the scene is finalizing on the beach, I had to swim out to sea for 1/2 mile and tread water until the scene is ready to be shot. The film crew are situated high on the beach, and suddenly Dick Lester is shouting at me saying, "Come in, Mal! Come back, Mal!" I swam leisurely to shore, not knowing at the time that there was a huge stingray chasing me. Standing safely with the crew back on the beach, Mal finally spotted the giant fish, which was more than 15 feet long. Ugh, I bet that was scary. During another evening in Nassau, Mal and Neil hit the bars with 33-year-old Louise Harrison Caldwell. She was George's older sister. While they were talking over drinks, they overheard two patrons, sailors, who weren't saying nice things about the Beatles. Louise said one of them remarked, "I knew them in Liverpool when they all had dirty necks and never took a bath." In that same instant, Louise and Neil observed Mal standing up. Louise recalled Mal towered over them. He told the sailors quite vehemently to apologize, or they could choose to drop dead. The sailors made a hasty exit, leaving their drinks behind and muttering under their breaths. "Well, they found out at that moment," says Louise, "that you do not make derogatory remarks about the Beatles." Mal wrote a letter to Lily saying he was enjoying his time in the Bahamas, but he had become increasingly annoyed by all the Americans who are like a plague here. For every bush seems to hide one of his cine camera, and they are really very rude and bad-mannered. His favorite moments during the Bahamas shoot came when he was with the Beatles, whether it was tooling around in the island with them in rented sports cars, whether it was or wearing the straw hats he had bought for the boys and himself. At this time, John had just gotten his driver's license, and he couldn't wait to get behind the wheel, insisting on going for a drive with Mal at the end of each day's shoot. Mal wrote that only John could treat a famous race circuit with such contempt. The Beatles' method of driving was to push the accelerator to the floor from the word go and leave it there. And believe me, a 10-minute drive with John hurtling around hairpin bends must have taken a year off my life. On March 13th, Richard Lester's production changed locations and they flew to Austria. The band and their entourage stayed at the Edelweiss Hotel with easy access to the ski slopes in Obertauern, a winter sports resort. 4 days later, Mal reprised his role as the channel swimmer. Just like when he was in the Bahamas, what should have been a simple cameo turned into something more harrowing. Tony Barrow can never forget the sight of Mal standing in the bitter cold. Poor Mal must have been absolutely frozen. All he was wearing was an old-fashioned swimming costume with a cap and goggles and a thick layer of grease to protect him from the cold. Everyone was a bit concerned that he would freeze to death before the scene was over. There were snow-covered mountains as a backdrop, and the scene called for the Beatles to be engaged in a good-natured curling match when one of the film's villains substitutes a bomb for the curling stone. It explodes, blowing a hole in the ice and allowing the channel swimmer to the surface. This scene had to be shot 3 times. Mal remembered because I was so cold, I just couldn't speak. Going down again and coming up, I spoke my lines, but on submerging again, I could not stay down and kept popping to the surface. That's when somebody had the bright idea of putting a large weight at the bottom of the hole for me to hand onto, with the instructions from director Dick Lester. "Stay down as long as you can, Mal, so we can finish the shot." Being a real trooper, after I said my lines, I submerged, took hold of the weight, and stayed down, holding my breath. Mal didn't know it, but Lester had been shouting with increasing desperation, "You can come up now, Mal! Coming up now! Come up now, Mal!" Mal, in the meantime, was nestled below the surface, pushing his lung capacity to the limit in order to land the scene. Finally, self-preservation brought me up for the air, he wrote. Wrapped in a towel, I walked in my bare feet about 400 yards, while the whole crew stood up and cheered. I spent 2 hours in the hottest bath with a bottle of rum thawing out. It was pins and needles from head to toe, but the cheers and the clapping made it all worthwhile. Next, Dick Lester's production relocated to London, where they would return to Twickenham Film Studios to shoot the film's interior scenes. It was there on April the 5th that the Beatles shot a scene in an Indian restaurant, complete with a group of Indian musicians performing an Eastern-tinged instrumental version of A Hard Day's Night. During a break, George picked up one of the musicians' sitars, a moment that marked the birth of Harrison's love affair with Indian classical music. That same month, the film was retitled Help, prompting John to compose the title track that same night. The Beatles got together with George Martin at EMI Studios to complete work on the Help LP. It was a groundbreaking effort that included classically trained studio musicians performing on such Lennon-McCartney compositions as Yesterday and You Got to Hide Your Love Away. On May 27th, Mal celebrated his 30th birthday with a rare day off in Liverpool with Lily, Gary, and the rest of the Evans clan. Brian marked the occasion with a telegram wishing the Roadie many happy returns. But aside from the manager's warm-hearted intrusion, Mal and his family were experiencing a rare moment outside the swells of Beatlemania. Lily felt that the global phenomenon of the Beatles had occurred outside of her world. She was well aware of their music, but to her mind, Beatlemania was synonymous with loneliness. Outside regular visits from her 15-year-old niece, Shan, Lil spent the majority of her time in the company of her 3-year-old son. Other than Mal's growing collection of band mementos, the Beatles held little sway in her home. Mal had been gone so often, the bandmates didn't have many impressions of Lily. Lily said, "I always felt we came in second." It was very hurtful, especially when she focused to cover for her husband, telling Gary inevitably that Daddy has to be away for work. So I'm going to end the video here. In this episode, we see that Mal was still the jack of all trades regarding the Beatles. He had a bag with all the things the Beatles might need, and then he started carrying another bag. Then Mal got a cameo in The Hard Day's Night, and there was some scary moments in what was supposed to be a simple shoot. Lastly, we saw that while Mal was securely in the Beatles' inner circle, Lily felt that she was on the outer circle. The Beatles weren't around her enough to have an opinion of her, and she spent most of her time away from Mal and in the company of her niece and 3-year-old son. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you.